After years of rumors and speculation, Nintendo has finally released their next generation handheld. While the Switch delivered on features, portability, and power, Nintendo's newest system, the Nintendo Switch 2, takes that and pushes it to another level. The Nintendo Switch 2 released on June 5th, 2025 for $450. I wasn't exactly able to pre-order one when it was available, but I was lucky enough to find one at my local Walmart the day it released. There were only 2 left in stock, by the way. When you take a look at the Switch 2 and compare it to the OG Switch, you can see a big difference, especially if the OG Switch has the neon red and blue Joy-Cons attached. While at first glance, it may just appear to be a Switch XL, when you actually begin using the system, you'll notice many changes. One of them is the larger, higher resolution screen. Compared to the 720p display on the OG Switch, the Switch 2 has a 1080p display, while also supporting HDR and displaying up to 120 frames per second. The 2 Joy-Cons included with the Switch 2 are also larger and more comfortable to hold. They no longer attach to the Switch via a rail, but instead use strong magnets, kind of like MagSafe on an iPhone. With new controllers also come new features, including a mouse mode. As the name suggests, it lets you use the Joy-Con controller as a mouse, which can be helpful for first-person shooters, I guess. Also included are the usual Joy-Con straps and the Joy-Con grip, which lets you attach the Joy-Cons to make it feel like a console controller. Now let's take a look at the Switch 2 console. Up front is the display and the Joy-Cons attached to the sides. On the bottom, there's the intake vent and a USB-C port for charging and connecting to the dock. You'll also find the adjustable kickstand, and under it you'll see a microSD Express card slot. Keep in mind that the Switch 2 only supports microSD Express cards and not the standard microSD cards. I've tested this myself, and I got an error message saying that the card won't work. On the top, you'll find the power and volume buttons, exhaust vent, USB-C port for charging or for the Switch 2 camera accessory, audio jack, game card slot, and the small microphone for game chat. There are 3 types of games that the Switch 2 can use. Those are Switch game cards, the same ones that the OG Switch used back in 2017, Switch 2 game cards, and Switch 2 game key cards. The difference between the Switch 2 game cards and game key cards is that the game cards have the full game loaded onto a 64GB cartridge, whereas game key cards only have a key to download the game from the Nintendo eShop, making it closer to a digital game which can still be resold, lent, or transferred just as easily as a real physical game. When you take a look at the Switch 2 dock, you can see that it's quite a bit larger, especially when compared to the original Switch dock. Around back, you'll find the power input, an HDMI port, and a wired LAN port. You'll also notice that the dock has a built-in fan to keep the system cool. Oh, and there's 2 USB ports on the side. As for the remaining technical specifications, the Switch 2 uses NVIDIA's T239 system on a chip. This combines an 8-core ARM A78C CPU and NVIDIA Ampere-based graphics. If this sounds powerful, in reality it actually performs closer to a mobile RTX 2050, while still including features like DLSS and ray tracing. Outside of the chip is 12GB of LPDDR5X RAM and 256GB of UFS flash storage. You can expand the storage with a microSD Express card up to 2TB. The UI on the Switch 2 is very similar to the OG Switch, with the addition of rounded edges on every game tile, and a game chat feature. I have tested game chat with a few of my friends that live both here in the United States as well as overseas, and it actually works very well. Noise cancelling technology is used to filter game and background noise from your voice. The only complaint I do have is that there's no way to set the default chat layout, so to expand the game screen I would have to manually do so in the chat settings every time.
That shortcut saves me so much time.
Alright.
Look at me, I'm in 15th place. I'm so good.
The Nintendo eShop is also available on the Switch 2, and it's also much smoother and easier to get around, with less slowdown and bugs compared to the original Switch. This is where you purchase digital games and download them to your system. If you purchase the Switch 2 Mario Kart bundle, this is where you would download it. Games download much faster on the Switch 2 compared to the Switch. On the Switch, I can really only get around 30 megabits per second, but on the Switch 2, I can get around 100 to 200 megabits per second. There's also a small but decent selection of launch titles, including the new Mario Kart World, Cyberpunk, Split Fiction, Fast Fusion, and the Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour, which is more of a system introduction and collection of tech demos than an actual full game, but it's only $10, so... The Switch 2 is also backwards compatible with most Nintendo Switch games, with many games also seeing a performance increase and faster loading on the Switch 2 compared to the original Switch. Compatibility is not perfect, as there are a handful of games and other apps that are not supported, but there are a couple of Switch games that have gotten updates, frequently referred to as Nintendo Switch 2 editions. It's essentially the same game, but designed to run natively on the Switch 2, with improved graphics and frame rate compared to the original Switch, plus some other features. Some upgrades are free, while others may cost around $10 to $20. They aren't strictly necessary, as the original versions will run just fine on the Switch 2. Not every game is going to receive a Switch 2 update. Fortnite, for example, did receive an update for the Switch 2. This version runs with higher detail and double the frame rate compared to the original Switch version, which is known for struggling in terms of performance. Another game which recently got the Switch 2 treatment is Hogwarts Legacy. The original Switch version, apart from its downgraded graphics, occasional frame drop, and frequent loading screens, was still a pretty solid version of the game. The Switch 2 version is much better, delivering a more stable frame rate, better graphics, and reduced loading screens, making it closer to a current-gen console or PC. It's still running at 30 FPS and not 60, but it's not a big problem as the game is still fully playable at this frame rate. High performance also results in high temperatures, and the Switch 2 delivers. In handheld mode, it doesn't really get too hot even when playing an intense game like Fortnite. When you dock the console and output to the TV, at that point you'll understand why Nintendo added a cooling fan into the dock, because in TV mode, temperatures go up like crazy. Once you take the Switch 2 out of the dock after a long period of gaming, I would recommend giving it a second to cool down. Battery life is not impressive either. While it does possess the largest battery out of all Switch consoles, it's not the most efficient. Nintendo claims it can last between 2 to 6.5 hours, and from my testing that seems about right. The OLED Switch and the revised OG Switch were known for being very efficient and having long battery life, lasting 4.5 hours at minimum. The final thing to consider is the price. The base model costs $450 US and $550 for the Mario Kart World Bundle, which is the one I picked up. This officially makes it Nintendo's most expensive console ever. As of right now, I'd say if you already have a standard or OLED Switch, unless you're only looking to play Mario Kart World and the few other third-party games that have already released for the Switch 2, I would not recommend upgrading to a Switch 2 right now, and that's mostly due to the poor battery life and limited number of Switch 2 exclusives. Personally, I would find more reason to do so if you're upgrading from a Switch Lite or if you're buying it as your first Switch, but I'll leave that decision up to you for now. Anyways, that's it for this video. If you found this video helpful, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any future videos like this, and I'll see you guys later.